For the last 60 years, one renowned Islamicist scholar has been responsible for shutting down critical analyses of the Quran by Westerners. Who was he, and how did he do it? Dr. J, you and I know that there is always this fear that we addressed last time, and there's also this tendency to deviate away from doing any critical or serious critical academic work when it comes to the Quran or Islam. Why is this, and when did it begin?
Well, in the last episode, we brought this whole problem that we have here in the West. And this is in the West. We're talking about Western scholarship, which is surprising in and of itself. Why have Western scholars censored themselves from doing a historical study of this book when they have done it with every other book, especially the Bible? In fact, the Bible has gone through enormous amount of critical analysis on every level with every type of criticism. So why has that not been done to the Quran? And we said in the last episode, it's all due to one man. It comes down to one man. I mean, surprisingly, you think, how could one man have this much control? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But who is this one man? We're going to talk about him now, and I think it's important that we do unpack him. I referred to him in my doctoral research. Shoemaker really highlights him, and that's why this book is so important, because finally we have a scholar who's admitting what no one else wanted to admit, who's actually saying we have a real problem in our own academic entourage of academics. We have a real problem because we cannot do what others can do. And it comes down to really this man from the last century in 1959 is when it all happened. And his name is Wilfred Cantrell Smith.
And I doubt a whole lot of people know about that, by the way.
Well, if you're an academic, you know who he is. He was head of McGill University in Montreal. Was moved then
very respected and prestigious university.
Absolutely. And then he went to Harvard, even more respected, went to the Harvard Divinity School, considered to be one of the top in the world, and maybe even the top, depending on who you're talking to, in Boston. He was there from 1916 to 2000. He was born in 1916 and lived till 2000. But he is the one that created this problem. And let me just quote him. In his book in 1959, he wrote this on page 59 about
critical work.
No, not critical work, about how every scholar should deal with Islamic material.
Right.
He says this: for any statement about a given religious tradition to be valid. Now notice he starts by making it very broad. Any religious tradition to be valid, it must be recognized as such and accepted by members of that religious community.
In other words, Muslims.
Yes, interestingly, he says any religious tradition, but it's only going to be Muslims that he applies this to. Continue. Therefore, in order to come to any valid understanding of the Quran, now he's not saying the Bible here.
That's right.
He starts off by saying any religious tradition, but now he's only referring to the Bible, the Quran. One must approach the text as a believing Muslim would and seek to understand it on this basis. All right, now, do you see a problem with that statement?
Yeah, so he's basically giving a cover to why he wants to say this about the Quran. He starts with this big umbrella, making it sound like he is open-minded about everything, when it comes to that. And you need to be respectful of the religious community, but now he shows you what exactly he is focused on.
So it's really only one book
right.
One community that we must be respectful for.
Correct.
Here's what's interesting. So if you study any religion, if you study the Bible, or if you study Bhagavad Gita for the Hindus, if you study the Book of Mormons for the Mormons, if you studied Charles Taze Russell for the Jehovah's Witnesses, if you study any religious book, you have to let that person from that community, first of all, agree with you. It has to be agreeable to them as the believer before it can be considered to be valid, is what he's saying. That's what you think he's saying.
That's right.
But the application within the same quote is only one book and one community, and that is the Quran and Muslims.
Let me push back. If I were to listen to him, let's say he was saying this in front of me right now, I would have asked him, can you show me two Muslims who agree in the same thing?
Granted, there is a problem right there. But even the fact that he has to go run it by them. In my doctoral thesis, when I was studying Wilfred Smith, I went and showed applications where anytime he wrote an article or anytime he wrote a chapter of a book that he was on, he would show it to his Muslim friend. And he'd say, would you accept what I'm saying here? And until he got a yes from this man, he would not publish
So
it.
he's doing community testing on his own writing.
That's right. Only that which the Muslim would allow him to say, could he then publish, which means nothing critical.
That's censorship right there.
Right, or that, but you can see there's nothing critical. You take critical analysis out of it.
Exactly.
It may be historical, but it's not critical historical. So can you see it takes any critical analysis out of it, because no Muslim, especially a Muslim, would allow you to be critical of their book, the man, or their place. So can you see this became the dictum for all study there in the United States. Now is in Harvard. He goes on and says this. Oh, this is what Shoemaker says. This is on page 4 of this book. He says, Smith was able to direct the training and influence the methodological approach of many, if not the majority, of Islamicists who held and continue to hold positions in religious studies departments in North America. Now, an Islamicist is not an Islamist. Before people get confused. An Islamist is somebody from within Islam who is an expert on Islam. An Islamicist is somebody from outside Islam who's an expert on Islam. So we are both Islamicists.
Well, you're an Islamicist. I'm an Islamist.
No,
I am
no
a
longer,
former
because
Muslim.
you're no longer a Muslim.
I am a former Muslim, and I
you're-
know that faith inside out.
You've
I
gone from an
grew up
Islamist-
at the area where it's perceived to be the origin of that.
By virtue of being an apostate, you're an Islamicist now. Now, that's almost all of our chairs, not all, but many of our chairs in our institutions here in the West and in Europe are chairs of departments are held by Islamicists. There are some Islamists, and very few of them have a problem with this. The Islamicists should have a problem with what Cantwell Smith is saying here.
But
Yet
they don't.
We don't hear
Publicly,
any-
at least.
And this is why Shoemaker is having a problem. He's saying this is the dictum that has been used, that has been applied since 1959. Let's just say 1960. So for the last 60 years, this is what has been applied in all of our institutions in North America. Because of the fact he's from Harvard, the premier school, the Harvard Divinity School, the premier school in the United States, that dictum then permeated right through all of our institutions, all of our academias. Now, there's another one that came behind him, and his name is Mircea Eliade. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, from the University of Chicago. He followed Smith's paradigm. Shoemaker says this of him on page 5. In sharp contrast to the radically historical orientation of the tradition established in Göttingen, which is in Germany, known as, it's in German, so forgive me my pronunciation, Religionsgeschichte in German. Eliade and Smith advocated a deliberately ahistorical approach to the study of religion that privileged, above all else, individual personal experience. What basically unpack what he's saying here is that both these two, Eliade and Smith, stipulated that any study of the Quran, of Muhammad, of Islam, must be based from personal experience, from those from within the tradition. They must give their go. They must give their go-ahead. They must give their okay. They must give their stamp of approval before you could publish or even write an article.
So to be honest with you, Dr. Smith, I don't see this as a scholarly work when you're asking the very community that you are researching, their history in this case, to approve or disapprove even your own findings. I mean, isn't scholarship is about discovering things?
Absolutely. And can you imagine if this dictum had been used on biblical studies? Can you imagine if this dictum was applied to Wellhausen or the school?
It would have been vilified, you know.
They would have been laughed out of court. Nobody would have allowed Christians to condemn. That means anybody that's doing the documentary hypothesis or source criticism on who wrote the book of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, any reference to whether Isaiah has 2 different authors, all this would have been thrown out of court because and they would have had to gone to every seminary and found evangelical Christians who would have accepted that historical perspective. Yeah. This would never have been applied. So how can Smith so suddenly turn it on its head and nobody criticize him for that. How is it since 1959 nobody in academia has bothered to criticize him until Shoemaker did so? And this is why it's important that Shoemaker is saying this. That's why he starts his book with this. That's why this chapter has to come first, to show where it all got wrong. And it happened with one man.
Absolutely. And this is why I've always been skeptical of certain PhD dissertations, because I'm reading through some of them, that you would look at it and you read it and you say, I don't see anything new in here. I mean, it's known knowledge. So what's the new discovery? Come to discover that, of course, the person is from an Islamic background usually, and the school where they're going to is an Orientalist school, and somehow, of course, the school doesn't want to be politically correct. They don't want to look like they're critical, and they approve of dissertations like this and degrees where you really wasted years not presenting a single thing that is groundbreaking or shaken.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. What are we going to talk about next time?
We're going to show how this permeated into the U.S. Defense Department, and then also came back and show how it was the actually Western Muslim scholars here in the United States and in Europe who then ran with this.
Amen. You've heard the man. Until next time, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel Cira International and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.